Here is one last slide on household waste disposal, and then I'll move on to hazardous waste disposal. So one of the methods that has now come into play in many towns, including Plymouth and some on the Cape, is pay as you throw, PATE. And how it works is that you pay more money for each bag, or you pay money for each bag of trash that you throw away. And the idea is to encourage citizens to do recycling or composting to reduce the amount of trash that they throw away. So it can work in one of two ways. Sometimes you purchase stickers from your disposal center, your landfill, your waste center, and you just stick the sticker. You buy these stickers, you stick each sticker on each bag of trash as you throw it away, and when you run out, you have to buy more. Unfortunately, there are a couple of downsides. Sometimes people, if they have to pay for the trash to be thrown away, that might encourage them to dump it illegally. That's one of the reasons why many centers accept things like old mattresses without charging a fee for the person to drop it off, the resident to drop it off, because they don't want to see that mattress just dumped illegally in the woods. However, there's another downside, particularly for Cape Cod residents. We currently have a situation where we have an annual fee in many towns. We have an annual fee for trash disposal. And that fee is the same whether you are a year-round resident or whether you're here only during the summer. And the people in the summer who are only summer residents, therefore, are helping to subsidize the cost of running the transfer station and offsetting some of the cost that families who live here year-round might otherwise incur. So if we are to switch to a pay-as-you-throw system, the burden will fall on the year-round residents to help cover the cost, and that's definitely a downside. Okay, so now we're going to move on to hazardous waste. So if a material is hazardous, it requires special means of disposal. We don't want it to just go into a landfill. We don't want it to be incinerated. Let's first look at the definition for hazardous waste. It can be liquid, solid, gas, or sludge. It's waste that's harmful to humans or to ecosystems. Most hazardous waste can be categorized as to one of these three categories: organic compounds, so those are typically pesticides and solvents; heavy metals, lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, etc., and radioactive waste. In the United States, 40 million tons of hazardous waste are generated each year. And there's some in our own homes that we have control over, but the vast majority actually comes from military, chemical industry, and mining. So, and this order, as a matter of fact. So the military is the #1 generator of hazardous waste, chemical industry the #2 generator of hazardous waste, and mining is the #3 generator of hazardous waste. In fact, these top three altogether, military, chemical, and mining, produce 95% of the hazardous waste. And roughly 5% of hazardous waste is that in our homes. But that is something that we have control over, direct control over, so it's important to look at it. So, actually, I'm going to go back to the definition for just a second. Hazardous waste must be treated before disposal. By EPA definition, treatment means make the waste less environmentally harmful. It doesn't mean it's going to be completely clean, but it's going to be less environmentally harmful. And it's also going to be stored in a way where it is less likely to leak. There's really no good solution to the hazardous waste problem except to create less of it in the first place, the old reduce tenet. Okay, I apologize. I thought we were going to go on to home waste. So let me just take a moment, though, to backtrack and tell you about some waste that is created in the home. That would include things often found in a garage or a workspace. So it might be antifreeze, batteries, paints, pesticides that people use on their own lawn and garden, drain openers, old thermostats, old thermometers. All of these things are found in the home and are hazardous waste. And in fact, in lab, you'll look at hazardous waste in your home. Another source of hazardous waste in the home is light bulbs. So the compact fluorescent bulbs, the CFLs, contain mercury. And so when you take them to your transfer station, they need to be separated and disposed of in the CFL section of your transfer station, not put in the regular trash. And so that would seem like a real downside of the CFLs, but they can be separated and the mercury can be recycled. And because the CFLs reduce the amount of energy burned in the first place, if that energy came from coal burning, then the amount of mercury put out into the atmosphere as a result of burning more coal would outweigh the amount of mercury that can be captured and recycled from a CFL bulb. Another source of waste that I didn't mention when we were talking about military chemical and mining, another large source of hazardous waste is medical waste. And that's waste that from anything from surgical gear, protective gear for nurses, all of that kind of stuff that needs to go into a specific process to be managed properly. Okay, so now let's look at some of the legislation that has been designed to protect the environment and human health from hazardous waste. The first one is RCRA, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, first initiated in 1976 and updated in 1984. And it allows the EPA to work with businesses to reduce or even eliminate hazardous waste and to track it and ensure proper disposal. So the EPA works with businesses to provide cradle-to-grave tracking. So cradle when that hazardous waste is generated in the manufacturing process, all the way through to its disposal. And that has been successful. A more recent one is CERCLA. That's Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. It's also known as the Superfund Act. And in this act, taxes were imposed upon chemical and petroleum industries, and they held site owners, so an owner of, say, a site where a chemical company buried its chemical waste was then financially liable for cleaning up the waste. And then the tax revenue from the chemical and petroleum industries was also used to clean up any abandoned or non-operating hazardous waste sites where there is not a responsible party that can be found. So a couple of issues with Superfund. First of all, the taxes that were initially imposed on chemical and petroleum industries, that part of this CERCLA Act was repealed. So there are no longer these taxes coming in to help pay for the cleanup. So the tax revenue that is currently in use is tax revenue from businesses and personal income tax. So we, through our work taxes, our income taxes, are paying to have some of these areas cleaned up. A second issue is that site owners were held financially liable. And sometimes there were situations where the site owner, when they bought the property, did not know, they weren't informed, or there was even testing done and the results were fudged, so that the current owner never knew that the land that they purchased was contaminated, and yet they were held financially liable, which is an issue. But generally it's been a very positive thing, and it has helped to clean up areas. This was initially put into play or put into an act to take care of the problem of Love Canal. So I'll give you a brief overview of what happened at Love Canal. So back between 1900 and 1910, there was a gentleman by the name of Love who intended to build a dream community near Niagara Falls. And one of the parts of his dream community was that he was going to dig a canal between two rivers to generate electricity from that flow of water. So he dug the canal itself, the ditch, but he eventually went bankrupt, and the dream community was never built, and the canal was left as a giant ditch. It wasn't finished. It wasn't connected to the two rivers. It was just a nice big ditch. And in 1920s, it started to become a dumping ground for municipal trash and also industrial trash. And there were a number of chemical companies that were contributing their chemical waste to this ditch, this giant ditch. And they would put it in barrels, but the barrels would eventually rust and leak and did contaminate the water. So in 1953, the community of Niagara wanted to build a community with an elementary school for the baby boomer population. And so they sought to purchase the land, which was now covered up. The canal was filled in with dirt, and they sought to purchase it from a company called Hooker Chemical Company and a number of other chemical companies. Hooker gave them full disclosure and said, no, this is not a safe place to build schools and a community. And the school committee insisted on buying the land. So Hooker eventually sold it for a price tag of $1, and in the sales agreement, they had full disclaimers about what the land was covering. But there were 100 homes and a school built, and eventually people moved in, and one season there was a particularly rainy season, and all of a sudden this waste started bubbling up out of the ground. And it turned out that this toxic material was burning children and was causing birth defects. And some of the birth defects were unusual. For example, some of the children were born with an extra row of teeth, so having 2 rows of teeth. There were also some more typical birth defects, such as a cleft palate, but increased numbers over what's normally found. Excuse me. There was an increase in miscarriages as well. So it turned out that this material contained 82 toxic compounds, 11 of which are known carcinogens. And so a super fund was created to buy out the people's property who lived there and then to clean up this area. And this is also a case of environmental justice to the rescue, because the people were bought out. I don't believe there were ever any criminal charges or even civil charges placed against the school board for having done such an outrageous move. I don't believe there were any, but it was a very sad situation, but did end up as a case where environmental justice was served. Briefly, just to let you know as well that the Superfund was used as well on the original Otis Air Force Base to clean that up. which was quite an expensive project. All right, so there will be just one last wrap up of a screencast, and that will be it.